Welcome to finishing up chapter 19. Today, what we'll do is to cover the first section and the fourth section. So the first section is activity-based costing. The fourth section is quality. We'll go through these. And as always, if you have any questions, just let me know. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. So here are the notes. Well, first of all, activity-based costing. We started this the other day, or at least we did in my other section, and then my book stopped working. I couldn't get access to it. Technical glitches. So I saved it until today. So I'll give you the nutshell version of this. I'll skip some things, and that's okay. If you're an accounting major, you'll take this in upper division cost accounting, and you'll fill in some things I'm not covering today. And it's not very difficult anyway. Whoops, there go the lights here in the classroom. Bad about that today going on. So here with activity-based costing, it's all going to be about overhead. We're going to refine how we account for overhead, both in terms of how we pool it and how we allocate it to products we produce. So here with activity-based costing, or ABC, well, our goal is going to be to assign cost to products to avoid undercosting and overcosting. And products which are overcosted tend to cross-subsidize products which are undercosted, especially if prices are set based on cost plus a markup. And I'm going to skip that simple example of product cross-subsidization. So direct costs are not going to be problematic, really, because we tend to trace them to our cost objects. So for direct materials and direct labor, we know exactly how much each cost object's consuming. So those are cut and dried. But what is fuzzier or subjective will be indirect costs or overhead. And they're usually a blame for cross-subsidization, as the cost driver chosen to allocate them may not be closely tied to the cause of the indirect costs. Whoops, left off an S here. Let me put that on. While I'm thinking. I'll be showing you an example in just a bit, but just have set some things off. Here in B, ABC refines product costing by breaking the manufacturing process down into separate activities. And each one is going to have one indirect cost pool and one cost driver. Product costs are compiled based on these activities. And instead of referring to the book, I will show you on the board in a moment how we can conceive that the final cost of a product is accumulating cost of activities from start to finish. And we can contrast ABC with traditional plant-wide overhead allocation rates. And the plant-wide rate reflects an approach of very broad averaging versus the more narrowly defined cost pools under ABC. So if something is more narrowly defined, usually it's more accurate. Same thing with activity-based costing. It's going to more accurately refine how we allocate overhead so that our numerical allocations of overhead in the way of dollars that we allocate to products are more closely going to reflect actual resource consumption. And we'll see how. So just to show you a simplified example of what that would look like in the book, that illustration, we'll be taking a look at example 1 and example 2 in just a few minutes. I'd like to show you something from these first. So we have that the Sarasota Sailboat Company has traditionally allocated overhead through a plant-wide rate. Thus, it has one overhead cost pool. So that's the old plant-wide one. Used machine hours as the allocation base. It budgets overhead of $100,000 and 50,000 machine hours for next year. I'll stop there because I will come back to the rest of that after a while. But let me stop my share and put something up here on the board. So when it comes to this one traditional plant-wide rate that, quite frankly, isn't too accurate, it's not too good. Well, we've got this great big plant-wide overhead cost pool. So all these areas costs there in the factory, lumped into overhead. Not too good to do them that way because they don't behave alike. They behave very homogeneously because there are so many different ones. And this will be allocated based on a cost driver of, I got that dollar sign, of 50,000 machine hours. Here I go again. You make a mistake once, it's so easy to repeat it. So that's really traditional. Machine hours, a traditional cost driver. It sure would be nice if we can break this activity into separate activities and therefore break this one big plant-wide overhead cost pool down to some smaller ones being more alike. So we'll see how we do that. Oops, apologize there. And this. Just to go over this in case you're having trouble seeing it. Plant-wide overhead cost pool, $50,000. 50,000 machine hours, doing the cost driver. And these markers are working very well. I went upstairs and got this in my first class. And it's about dried up to. So now let me come back. Share my screen. Well then, for ABC, again, we're going to break this one big overhead cost pool down. So we'll do that here, number 2, and rather than reading everything for now, just trust me on this. This factory broke it down to 2 separate activities, machining and assembly. So machining is where the factory cuts parts out. So metal or wood or whatever the material may be. And it determined then that activity, it contained half the overhead cost pool, $50,000. And the allocation base, well, 50,000 machine hours. So it's saying that as they incur more and more machine hours, the overhead in this machining activity tends to go up. That makes sense. So as we go to ABC over here, So we have the machining activity. Again, $50,000. And cost driver, still 50,000 machine hours. That sounds familiar. But then there's another activity. It's assembly. And the allocation base, number of parts. That makes sense because in assembly, they put those parts together. So as they have more and more parts, they have more and more overhead in the assembly activity. Well, they've determined that the other half of overhead is there, $50,000, and 200,000 parts in total are being machined, are being put together at this factory. So again, they've taken this one big plant-wide overhead cost pool with all these disparate types of overhead costs going in there that don't all behave alike, and they divide it into two halves according to two types of activities they saw in the assembly line, each one with its own cost driver. A number of parts is not a traditional cost driver. That's even better. It sounds like that's going to correlate really closely with the overhead costs going into the assembly activity. That's great. So by breaking up that $100,000, we broke into these two smaller overhead cost pools. And again, each one is going to contain costs being more alike than that one great big plant-wide cost pool over there. Okay. So I'll come back to the rest of that in a little bit. And I'm sorry, for those of you online, I forgot to stop my share. So let me do that. Whoops, absent-minded professor. So as I do, I sure do hope that looks better online. All right, I'm sorry. What I was explaining was that under ABC, we're going to take this one big plant-wide overhead cost, break it into separate activities. In this case, we've identified two, machining and assembly. Half of that went to machine. And the allocation base, 50,000 machine hours. Makes sense because, well, in machine, that's where they cut the parts out. And the more machine hours they use, the more the overhead in that machining activity. And the remaining 50,000 was identified as overhead in the assembly activity. That's where they put those parts together. And they identified a great cost driver, number of parts. It's great because number of parts goes up. The dollar amount up there in the overhead tends to go up too in assembly. So these two smaller overhead cost pools are more homogeneous now. They behave more alike. Okay. Now let me come back. Well, here in C, ABC yields more accurate product cost data. Since multiple cost drivers are employed in each product is allocated indirect costs in direct proportion to the amount of the cost drivers it consumes. ABC thus more accurately reflects the causes of costs and therefore more accurately reflects resource consumption. This will prevent product cross-subsidization. I will show you in the example in a few minutes. Well, in contrast, traditional product costing allocates overhead based upon a plant-wide rate, which does not differentiate between different amounts of cost drivers and different products. Outside the traditional cost drivers of direct labor hours, direct labor costs, or machine hours. Now, in D, as we allocate overhead, it's going to be really familiar. The only difference is we're just going to allocate it from each activity. So in ABC, direct costs are always traced directly to finished product. Just think job order costing. That's good. There is no longer one large plant-wide overhead cost pool. That pesky one with all the disparate causes, with all the disparate costs in it that don't behave alike. Instead, there will be one cost pool per activity. And each activity's indirect cost pool is allocated to the product as follows. Again, this looks just like allocating overhead as we've done before. So the allocation rate equals the budget indirect cost of the activity. We could say overhead instead of indirect cost, and divided by the budget quantity of the cost driver. And then the indirect cost allocated equals the actual, don't worry about, standard quantity of the cost driver in the product times the allocation rate. We'll be doing just that with numbers in a couple of minutes. So we'll now go through an example and don't worry about those steps in the book. So here's this Sarasota Sailboat Company. Again, example one, and they're using a traditional overhead system for a plant-wide rate. So again, one cost pool, $100,000 in this big overhead cost pool and 50,000 machine hours to allocate. Manufactures two products, A and B. Both A and B contain $10 of direct materials, $9 of direct labor, and 2 machine hours. So we're to compute the product costs of A and B and comment on how the prices of the two products will compare if cost-based pricing is used. Well, for this, I have a little solution for you. And it's pretty easy. I think we can just take a look at the solution, which is at the very end of the outline for this chapter. There it is. So the plant-wide allocation rate, we have plenty of time in chapter 17, computing this. We would take the grand total of 100,000 of, excuse me, overhead budget and divide by 50,000 machine hours. We would get $2 per machine hour. So here is a little product job cost record for product A and product B. They both have the same amount of direct materials and direct labor. Again, those are cut and dried. We've traced the exact amount of the two products. But now the overhead allocated. Each product has 2 machine hours and the rate is $2 a piece. So $4 to each one. That means the product cost per unit is $23, no matter if it's A or B. So it looks like from this standpoint, they consume the same amount of resources. We'll get some more insight with ABC in a moment. How would they be priced? They would be priced the same. So if we're taking cost-based pricing, which means we take that cost and we add a markup to it. Let's say that markup is 100%. Well, $23 in cost, add to that 100% or $23 markup. So we simply double this price. Both A and B, therefore, are going to be priced at $46. Any questions there? Okay. Can back up. To example 2. So now the Sarasota Sailboat Company is contemplating switching to ABC after hiring a consultant to study the matter. And the consultant's report states ABC will refine the plant-wide rate by breaking the assembly line into separate activities. Therefore, there will be one overhead cost pool and one allocation base for each activity. And the consultant emphasizes that these smaller overhead cost pools will have more homogeneous costs in each, they behave more alike, and the allocation base for each is more likely to be a cost driver and thus correlate with the cost pool. That's a good thing too, because as that cost driver goes up, the amount of overhead in the activity tends to go up too. Thus, the overhead allocations under ABC will more likely reflect actual overhead consumption. Also, the consultant reminds the company that it can be more creative in the allocation basis it selects, and they need not even be financial in nature. So something there such as that number of parts is an allocation base. It's not traditional, it's not financial, but we sure can use it. The consultant also observed that while products A and B receive the same number of machine hours, they do not necessarily receive the same dose of each activity as they progress down the assembly line. For example, both products receive 2 machine hours, but A contains 5 parts, while B contains 20 parts. It's going to be more expensive to assemble. And the consultant identified 2 activities. Again, machining and assembly. So machining, allocation base, number of machine hours, overhead, $50,000, and there are 50,000 machine hours. Then assembly, allocation base, number of parts, again, making sense, because putting parts together in assembly, so as we have more parts, the overhead costs of the assembly activity go up. Well, then, dollars of overhead we budget in, again, 50,000, and the budget number of parts, 200,000. So we'll compute the product cost of A and B and comment on the insights the company has derived into product cross-subsidization. So again, let me go down here to the very end, show you the solution. So here in example 2, well, let's compute those overhead allocation rates first. In machining, we're left with only $50,000 and its budget overhead cost pool. We divide by 50,000 machine hours and we get $1 per machine hour. Then for assembly, we now have $50,000 in its individual overhead cost pool as well. We divide that by 200,000 parts. When we do, we get 25 cents per hour. Well, now for these 2 products, A and B, again, direct costs don't change. So direct material is still $10 each. Direct labor still $9 each. Overhead allocated. Now machine will have the same allocation. And the reason is that each product contains 2 machine hours. So multiply that by $1, we get $2. But now the difference comes in assembly. Only 5 parts in A times 25 cents, $1.25. 20 parts in B times 25 cents each gives us $5. So now the product cost in A is $22.25. The product cost in B is $26. So versus before, versus that plant-wide overhead allocation rate, the cost of A has dropped the cost of B has gone up. So sure enough, as I said here, A's price will decrease while B's price will increase. That's because A went down in price and B went up in price under ABC. Well, thus, before under the plant-wide rate, A was cross-subsidizing B. That meant A was overcosted, overpriced. So A's customers were paying more than they should. B's customers were paying less than they should. Now that's been corrected. So one possible cost savings, by the way, is to reduce the number of parts, especially with product B. So any questions there? Okay. Let's come on back up here to where we left off. Let's look at some advantages of ABC. Well, first of all, different products may have different amounts of cost drivers. In our example, product A had fewer component parts and was thus allocated lower assembly costs under ABC. Under traditional costing, which would apply factory-wide overhead based on overhead cost or direct labor hours or machine hours, there's old traditional familiar allocation basis. Product A received the same amount of overhead as product B. And this would have been true if both products had the same amount of direct labor costs or machine hours or direct labor hours. Well, ABC also pinpoints to product designers opportunities for cost reductions through reducing the quantity of cost drivers which are designed into products. For example, what are some possible reductions related to products A and B? One really stands out, and that's the number of parts. B has more parts. If we could reduce those, that could save some money. And number three, ABC also pinpoints to manufacturing personnel opportunities for cost reductions through reducing the quantity of cost drivers related to manufacturing. And that's part of something broader concept called activity-based management, or ABM. And non-value-added activities, I will explain, and therefore costs should be reduced or eliminated. A non-value-added cost is one that adds no value. It adds no value in the customer's eyes. It adds no value in manufacturing. It does not make the product better made. A value-added cost would. We'll discuss those after a while. Well, we should try to eliminate non-value-added activities whenever we could. That's going to reduce our costs. So what are some of these opportunities? Again, number of parts. If the company's in a competitive environment, what will its competitors tend to do? They'll tend to do just that. They want to build a cheaper product, therefore up their own profit. So they won't stand still. Now, on the other hand, if companies in a non-competitive environment, how can non-value-added costs affect its cost and pricing structure? Well, they're going to tend to stay there because there's no incentive for the company to analyze things and drive them out. Then number four, ABC also has many homogeneous indirect cost pools because activity areas are used. And operating personnel play a key role in designating which activity areas to use because they know what's going on the assembly line. In contrast, traditional product costing uses only one plant-wide or a few indirect cost pools, and these cost pools contain many heterogeneous costs. So they don't all behave alike, and that sure does make allocating overhead not very accurate from the standpoint of resource consumption. Then number six, ABC's indirect cost allocation basis may either be financial or non-financial in nature, just like those parts. But traditional product costing employs only financial basis. By the way, in case you're curious, in G, a year-end overallocated and underallocated overheads disposed of in the same manner that we cite under job order costing. And each of these same examples can be extended to upstream and downstream costs. They can also be extended to service sector companies and to merchandising companies. So any questions there? By the way, with reducing the number of parts, yes, that's definitely a way to build something cheaper. You're reducing a cost driver there. It's just like automobile manufacturers have figured out over the years. Well, if we were looking at a car radiator grill, how many parts are there today in modern day cars?
Parts it's far less than
Yeah, one basic part. And what's it made of? No, plastic. Yeah, actually, yeah, go tap on one. It's injectable to plastic with some mylar slapped over it to make it look like chrome. So it's built pretty cheaply. I was reading a while back that in 1959, Cadillac radiator grill contains over 500 individual parts, and they were made of real chrome. So that was very costly. Costly in terms of direct materials and costly in terms of putting it together. But over the years, Cadillac determined that that was a non-value add part. Non-value add activity because, well, how many people really pay attention to their car radiator grill? Most don't, no. Not unless they're a car buff. So for most people, Cadillac could get by with that just fine. Declare a non-value add cost. Therefore, take it away. Make that Cadillac cheaper. Whereas for a car buff, that would be a value add cost. A value add cost because car buff appreciates it, but most people don't. Okay. Other questions? Well, let's come back then. We'll go over the other topic we've got today. Number 4 here, and that's quality. So quality here is going to be a totally non-computational topic. So something is of quality. It sounds like it's good, it's desirable, it's better than something of non-quality. So it might be better in terms of being built better, and or it might be better in terms of pleasing the customer more. So those are two aspects of quality that we'll take a look at here today. So quality, again, this is non-computational. You won't find it difficult. So again, that's one nice thing about this course. We have a mixture of computational and non-computational topics. So we get a little bit of break from numbers. Well, one interesting thing about quality is that one current term is to measure performance based on non-financial measures. And one such measure is quality. Well, American companies tend to ignore quality in the past, or at least gave it very little attention. partly because traditional accounting systems did not measure it. So when it came to quality, well, there was no accounting number to crunch. There was nothing in financial statements. So there was nothing to draw anyone to consider quality. Quite frankly, it did not impact net income, or so it appeared on the income statement. And net income is one of the most important accounting measures that people pay attention to. So if it isn't there, it's like it doesn't exist. And that's too bad. So in the past, again, American companies really didn't tend to look at quality as much as they should. So today, it's common to pull together non-financial measures and show some measure of quality. But still, quality doesn't get looked at as much as it should. Now, if there were a quality expense on the income statement, you can bet people would look at it. Well, and be another reason the American companies tended to ignore quality was the mistaken belief that in considering quality initiatives, that doing nothing would maintain the status quo. And such a belief is not likely to be accurate, as competitors will not remain at a standstill. We can consider the Japanese. Well, American automobile manufacturers didn't find out the hard way. They did so a number of years ago when Japanese, especially Toyota, were really improving quality initiatives. And Detroit wasn't. It was just sitting there because it thought, well, we've been making cars for decades. We've been making them good enough. But Toyota found they could make a better car, more reliable. And not only was it built better, but also it was pleasing customers more because that's what they wanted. They wanted a reliable car. So back in starting in the 70s and definitely in the 80s, American consumers bought more and more Japanese cars. Yeah, they're built better. They get better gas mileage. And even though Detroit did a number of things to improve quality after that, customers never perceived American-made automobiles the same. So they lost a lot of permanent market share. It still hasn't recovered. Now, I don't know if you've ever seen ISO numbers, like ISO 9000, 14,000, where companies advertise them? No? Okay. Well, it's about quality. So the International Organization for the Standardization has, has developed international quality control standards, including the ISO 9000 and 14,000 families of standards, in order to promote total quality management. And preliminary research suggests that companies achieving ISO certification enjoy higher stock prices than uncertified companies on average, because it is a signal to the marketplace that we're doing something better, and therefore we expect higher return on investment. And a company has to go through a long application process. They have to go through an audit to show that they are meeting these standards, and there are many of them. But it says we're doing things better. Well, earlier I alluded to that quality might mean that something is built better, or it might mean that customers perceive it as being better. So quality encompasses both those things. Quality of design and conformance quality. Let's see what those are. Well, first, conformance quality is how well a product conforms to its design and production specifications. how it's supposed to be built. So it means how well made is it. And note that attention to conformance quality can decrease defective products and thus decrease costs. So we build it right the first time. Fewer defects. So that's conformance quality, how well made it is. Well then, in the consumer's eyes, that's quality of design. It's how well the product meets the needs and desires of customers. Well, can we build a great product, but no one wants to buy it because they just don't perceive it to fit their needs and desires? Sure, we certainly can. For example, if we were building an ugly automobile, it might be built very well, but if no one wants it, well, they won't buy it. So in this case, that's an example of a product that has high conformance quality. It's built well. Low quality of design because nobody wants to buy it. So that's why I see in number 3. We can note that a product can meet manufacturing specifications and thus possess conformance quality, but fail to meet quality of design because it fails to meet customer needs and wants. Again, customers obviously won't buy it. So it can be as well made as you'd like, have high conformance quality. But if it's not what customers want, it has low quality of design and they just won't buy it. I think yuck. Now, on the other hand, could a product can have high quality of design so people would want it, they desire it, they like it, but have low conformance quality so it's not made well? Yes. One thing that I always think about here around Oscars time, gowns that actresses wear on Oscar signs, what they wear on the red carpet. As far as quality design goes, yes, people want them. They're designed by famous designers, they're beautiful, etc. But when it comes to conformance quality, how well made they are, well, would you want to put these in the washer? No, they'd fall apart. So they're designed to be worn once and only once and then donated to charities. Definitely not well made, flimsy. Well, number 4, American companies tended to pay more attention to conformance quality than to quality of design in the past. Consider why happened. So they made some well-made products that nobody wanted to buy. They were considered ugly. Then we mentioned value-added and non-value-added costs a little bit ago. Well, value-added costs may relate to either aspect of quality. So a value-added cost, there's an activity attached to it, so that value-added activity may increase conformance quality and/or quality of design. Non-value-added cost doesn't. So carefully considering quality also aids the identification and hopefully elimination of non-value-added costs, because let's get rid of them. They're not adding any value. We're just spending money. Oh, for crying out loud, there go the lights again. Well then, a quality driver is a cause of quality. It increases quality. A good example would be employee training. A good example would be inspection of our finished product to make sure that we're not turning out defective product. In F, since traditional accounting systems do not measure quality, Again, as we said, American companies tended to ignore it. They had little incentive, quite frankly, to improve quality. There was no accounting number to crunch. It did not appear to increase net income. But today, an increasingly important role of cost accounting is to compile the costs of quality and to report these costs to management. And the following categories comprise the costs of quality. They're also in your book. And you'll also find these on the website, the American Society for Quality. There's the URL. So there's actually a society to improve quality, and they do have certifications for people too. So these quality costs here, and of course an activity attached to every cost, so quality activities, you could also say. There are 4 categories. They're roughly in order of time as to when we encounter them. Well, first of all, we encounter prevention costs. That's even before manufacturing starts to take place. We're trying to prevent defective product from being made. So let's think about prevention costs. So the cost of activities designed to preclude the production of products which do not conform to specifications. And most prevention costs are incurred in R&D and product design. So upstream costs, again, before manufacturing. Another example is employee training. Because if we train our employees better, they are more likely to make the product correctly to start with. If we design the product better, and R&D and product design is sturdier, it is less subject to wear and tear, less subject to breaking down, whatever it may be. These are all examples of prevention activities. Well then, once we have completed manufacturing the product, either totally or partially, we can inspect it. So we have appraisal or inspection costs there. There are costs incurred for activities to test products for conformance quality. So again, that may happen before the product is totally made, or it may happen at the end of the assembly line, or both. But for a lot of products, if we can start inspecting them before they're finished on the assembly line, we can catch problems which are happening and they don't go all the way through the manufacturing process. We can stop manufacturing. We're testing the product. And obviously, this means that if prevention costs fail us, and we do have some problems in the product which have been manufactured into it, now we can cut our costs by stopping production and fixing things. So we hope we build the product right the first time through prevention activities. If we don't, we hope we catch the problem through appraisal or inspection activities. Now, let's say that we have a defect in that product. Something's wrong. A failure. Well, we hope that we catch it in-house before that product leaves our facilities and is sold to a customer. So number 3 is internal failure costs. That's what we would have then. That's when we catch the product before it goes out in the hands of a consumer. So if something's wrong, we catch it. So these are costs incurred for a defective product before it's given to a customer. other than prevention and appraisal costs. An example is rework costs. I will explain. Most internal failure costs are incurred in manufacturing. So, manufactured raw. Well, if we do find a defect, we've got two choices. We can either dispose of the product, just trash it, or we can rework it, which means we can fix it. So let's say that we're manufacturing shirts. Well, some shirts, we catch defects in them that we can fix, and they're very common. Things like seams not sewn shut, or buttons not sewn on, or strings, threads, which are hanging off shirts on the rack. And when they're hanging on the rack, and that's gone. These things we can easily fix. We can rework that shirt. And in a factory, there will be a department or a station called rework. So that's where things are fixed. And once the shirt's reworked, it should be perfect. It should be just like a shirt that was made right the first time. Maybe some of us are wearing reworked shirts today and we never know. Nothing's wrong with them. But let's say that there are other defects. We have machines that are malfunctioning. Machines are ripping some of the shirts as they go along the assembly line. Some machines are dripping lubricants on the machine, on the shirts that go down the assembly line. These sound non-fixable, so we're going to have to trash those shirts. Just scrap them. Now, I could say there's a third thing that goes on with some garments. They are sold not as perfect or first quality, but instead they're sold as second or third quality. And which types of stores do you think they get sold to? Yes. Exactly. Ross, DD's, TJ Maxx, factory outlet malls. Not everything in the factory outlet mall, and certainly not everything in the other stores, but some things are. And the defects are very slight. Otherwise, they scrap them. But things like double threads, that's a common one. It's where the sequencing of weaving gets off and two threads are woven alongside each other when they should be woven alternatingly. You'd never know. Well, let's sure hope that we catch a failure in-house, internal failure cost. If we don't, we have the worst one of all. We have an external failure cost. So looking at number 4 there, those are costs incurred for a defective product once in the hands of a customer. Examples include warranty costs and opportunity costs pertaining to loss of customer goodwill. External failure costs are potentially the highest, are the most difficult to measure. And most external failure costs occur primarily in downstream functions. Marketing, distribution, customer service. For example, in customer service, because we have to fix that product under warranty. Distribution, we might have to send a new product out to that customer or send parts out. Things of that nature. Well, external failure costs. We may never know how much we have because customers may never report all these to us. Plus, we might not even realize some of these exist. For example, let's say that you have a bad meal at a restaurant, and that's an external failure cost. Well, a lot of people, what will they do about that once they get home? Post a nasty review. Yeah, this food wasn't fit to eat. I came home and I felt ill whatever. It was gross, whatever it may be. So they'll post, they'll tell friends and family members. So this can definitely damage a restaurant. The restaurant may never know how much they've lost in sales. So they will never know this opportunity cost, those lost sales being an opportunity cost. External failure costs. Another thing is that, well, all these people that worry about that just won't come back. And that can be damaging. Yuck, I'm not going to go there and eat tonight, not after that review they had. Or another place where restaurants are reviewed is, maybe you've seen it, these reports, health inspector reports. You ever seen those? Now, every week they come out. So Florida is in most states, they come out in a newspaper. And yeah, Lakeland Ledger has them. So some of them are kind of non-consequential violations. Health inspector doesn't think so. The others are serious, like bugs or food not maintained at proper temperature, or one that I see quite a bit, an open container of meat that is dripping down on something else under it that's uncovered. Yuck. Employees not on hairnets, that's a common one. Employees not washing hands. Stuff stored on the floor that shouldn't be. So those can sure damage a restaurant too. Yeah, one that was severely damaged, and they deserve to be, close by 8 years ago. And the building is still in South Florida. It's called Louis Mack's Steakhouse. I don't know if anyone's ever seen it. It's down by Palace Pizza, South Side, but it's still standing. And when I first came to town, I went there and it was good. But then suddenly health inspector reports started occurring and nasty reviews from customers started occurring. And sure enough, they had some nasty employees, as I found out when I had an out-of-town guest, and the owner, or well, I shouldn't say owner, the manager said, oh yeah, they're not having a good day out there today. Well, there were all kinds of reviews from people where employees have been nasty to them. So very dissatisfied employees. And of course, before too long, the restaurant closed. But the building still stands. But with the nasty employees and the horrible reviews, that was sure a comedy of errors in how not to run a restaurant. But Louis Mack's, if you ever notice it, as you head south, it is going to be on your left-hand side. It's getting more and more run down every year. Another thing you can certainly have with external failure costs are product liability lawsuits. So Morgan & Morgan, they're out there just waiting. Even if they weren't around, there are plenty of other lawyers still around. There are way more lawyers than accountants, I'm afraid. So always someone out there to at least coach people to say that they were injured, let's say in a slip and fall, or they ate at this restaurant and they became ill with food poisoning, whatever it may be. So in other words, let's get some money. Yeah, there was a good one that I saw today. Hyundai and Kia have discovered a fire hazard in some of their vehicles. So they are advising people not to park them in garages. I guess they catch on fire. I haven't read the full story. Spontaneous combustion. But just imagine, park your vehicle in your garage and it suddenly catches on fire. So they're going to have a lot of product liability lawsuits. That's a definite external failure cost. Now, and restaurants estimate that only about 5%, definitely less than 10% of customers ever complain to them. Instead, they post their bad experience online, they tell everyone, or they just quietly don't return. So that's why businesses, a lot of them, trying to get customers to tell the business their bad experience so the business can make it right. It's a lot cheaper to keep customers than try to get a new one. It's also a lot cheaper than if that customer goes off and complains to everyone and posts these bad reviews. So that's why we see so many efforts to try to get our experience from us. That's definitely why Publix has the Publix guarantee. You know, if it isn't right, they'll make it right. So I guess that's another reason why at Publix, shopping is a pleasure. Yep. Then if cost of quality can be reported in a COQ analysis. Now, this is not a formal financial statement. There's no set format for it, but it's just a listing of quality costs, quality activities, optional for a company to do. It's just a way to try and get some focus on it. But note the prevention and appraisal costs are most likely to be reported by accounting systems because they're actual costs, and therefore they can be measured accurately. But internal failure and external failure costs include many opportunity costs which are difficult to estimate, typically not captured by accounting systems, so they go unnoticed. Well, if management fails to include all the opportunity costs in a COQ analysis, they will underestimate failure costs and will most likely underinvest in provision and appraisal. Also consider this from the standpoint of compensation based upon measures of profitability. Well, they think they're improving their bottom line of net income, and they are temporarily. But later on, this comes back to bite them, just like in a big way it did to Detroit automobile makers. So by that time, though, oftentimes management is out of it. So they don't suffer the repercussions, at least not that management team. Then number two, American systems failure to report opportunity costs likely contributed to American managers' underestimation of the cost of producing poor quality products. Market research and focus groups can help estimate such opportunity costs. You can get people to say what they're really thinking, sometimes they don't. And third, it's usually cheaper to increase prevention and appraisal costs if failure costs will be reduced. Companies especially need to reduce external failure costs. Again, it's better to make it right the first time, and if you don't, at least catch it in-house through good appraisal or inspection activities. So any questions here? It's a dark classroom. So we have the external failure cost of that obviously defective light sensor. All right, well, very good. That's what I've got for you today. So I'll see you back on Thursday. Good night. Those of you online, good night.